This is the story we have. This is the part that was buried. And this is why it continues to matter.
You see, there's no public record to explain why. No journalist has ever been allowed inside. And the one man who documented what he found there, well, his name was simply erased from the records of the institution that sent him.
So let's begin with the conflict right at the heart of this entire story. There's a clear, official statement, and then there's a buried report that contradicts it at every single turn. Now, you have to understand, this isn't some recent event. It all started way back in 1909 with the discovery, which was immediately followed by an official denial. And today, more than 100 years later, that area is still closed off.
It was April 5th, 1909. The Arizona Gazette, which was a very real, legitimate newspaper, published a story right on its front page. It laid out, in detail, an expedition and what it had found. The report was filed by a man named G.E. Kinkaid. He was an established explorer, had decades of field work under his belt. He wasn't some fame-seeker or a known liar. He filed the report because he was instructed to. Kinkaid described finding a cave entrance, one that was basically invisible from the canyon rim, about 2,000 feet above the Colorado River. Inside, he said he found corridors that had been cut from solid rock, unnaturally smooth. He reported chambers filled with copper tools and tablets inscribed with some kind of unknown script. There were signs of a civilization, granaries, urns. And he found mummies, standing upright in carved-out niches, almost as if they weren't buried but were standing guard.
But Kinkaid was very explicit about one detail, a detail that stood out above all the others. The symbols, the artifacts, the burial chambers, none of it looked like any Native American culture he'd ever seen. What it resembled, he said, was Egyptian. He stated on the record that his whole expedition was supervised by a Professor S.A. Jordan of the Smithsonian. But just weeks later, the Smithsonian issued its own statement. They said they had no record of a Professor Jordan, no record of G.E. Kinkaid. The article, they pretty much said, was a complete fabrication. And that has been the official position ever since.
But the story doesn't just end in 1909. You see, hidden within this public park, there are these corridors with a permanent restricted status. Some of them are for legitimate ecological reasons, sure. But others, well, they carry no documented reason at all.
So, in 2017, a researcher named Brian Dunning filed a Freedom of Information Act request. He targeted restricted zones right near where Kinkaid's expedition was supposed to have happened. For one of those zones, he got back a single 4-page document, but almost all of it was just blacked out.
The one readable sentence cited Executive Order 13526. You should know that is the order that governs national security secrets. So here we have a section of a national park sealed off under national security law. Then, in 2019, a park ranger, an 11-year veteran, gave a recorded interview. He described finding a cave entrance with worked smooth stone, the exact same word Kinkaid used. He did what he was supposed to do. He radioed in the coordinates. But just hours later, he was debriefed by men with federal credentials he'd never seen before. They took his patrol log and told him the site was protected for reasons that were beyond his clearance. His formal inquiry about it just met with total silence.
And this account, it's not some isolated incident. There are actually 11 documented cases of similar testimonies from rangers all across the Southwest since 1990, and each one follows the exact same pattern: a discovery, the arrival of agents with these strange credentials, and then a wall of silence.
Now, you could just dismiss all of this as coincidence, maybe even fabrication. Except for one thing. The very evidence that could rewrite the history books, the history that makes Kinkaid's story seem impossible, is now coming from peer-reviewed science. For decades, the accepted model has been that humans first arrived in the Americas around 13,000 years ago. But in 2020, the scientific journal Nature published findings from Chiquihuite Cave in Mexico. They found stone tools confirmed by multiple dating methods to be 30,000 years old. That's nearly double the accepted timeline. And other studies have found similar problems. A 2018 genomics study in the journal Cell found genetic signatures in ancient Amazonian populations that actually match Australian peoples, not Siberian. And skeletal remains from Nevada's Spirit Cave, over 10,000 years old, showed genetic markers from a founding population whose origin is still, to this day, unexplained. So think about it. If a pre-Columbian civilization with different origins did reach the American Southwest,
It's logical they would have followed the Colorado River inland, and to survive the extreme heat, they would have had to build deep into the canyon walls. They would have created exactly what Kinkaid described. All of this leads to a pretty fundamental question. If these discoveries are real, why aren't they common knowledge? Well, the answer might lie with the same institution that was right there at the center of the original story. The Smithsonian Institution controls the official archaeological record of the United States. This isn't a theory, it's just a structural fact. Any artifact or any site has to receive Smithsonian validation to enter the historical record. Without that validation, a discovery, for all intents and purposes, does not officially exist. Take the case of Dr. John Reed. In 1968, this archaeologist documented 14 separate cave entrances in the Grand Canyon that showed clear signs of human modification. As he was required to do, he submitted his field notes to the Smithsonian. They were never returned. His letters went unanswered. And in the years that followed, he found himself completely unable to secure any federal funding for any project in the Southwest. And so you're left with one final question. Is the real objective here to protect the public from a simple newspaper hoax from 1909? Or is it to protect an official, established narrative from physical evidence that could shatter it completely?